fight for equal rights notes section in this chapter. And this section is about the environmental movement. I sort of introduced it in section 3 just a little bit, but we're going to talk about it more in section 4, obviously. Alright. In 1952, a blanket of deadly smog caused by coal fires engulfed the city of London, killing about 12,000 people. Coal smog is just one kind of toxic waste or poisonous byproduct caused by human activity. So something that is man-made, not just a natural occurrence. Other examples would include acid rain or byproducts of chemical and nuclear reactions, which, as you know, the United States and other countries as well started to experiment more with, different things we could do with nuclear power and the potentials for energy. That stuff started to become more of a concern. 10 years after the London smog incident, biologist Rachel Carson, here's a picture at the bottom of the slide, with her book Silent Spring, described the deadly impact the pesticides had on birds and other animals. Book was a sensation, and though chemical companies insisted they were not harming the environment, the public believed Rachel Carson. She also pointed out that any human activity was altering the environment. Carson's work compelled Congress to restrict the use of pesticide DDT and spurred widespread environmental activism among Americans. In 1969, a fire erupted in Cleveland, Ohio, on the Cuyahoga River. The fire started with a spark-ignited floating oil and debris, which were byproducts of industrialization. Time magazine reported on this, saying, "A person does not drown but decays in this river." Events like the fire on the Cuyahoga seem to further validate warnings in Carson's Silent Spring. In response to this growing environmental concern, there was a nationwide protest called Earth Day. We still celebrate Earth Day today. On April 22nd, 1970, close to 20 million Americans took part in Earth Day across the nation, doing various events. This yearly event attracted support of many of the same groups and people who supported civil rights and women's rights. It also drew support from environmental groups such as the Sierra Club, which was founded by John Muir in 1892. We talked about him. We were covering President Theodore Roosevelt and the creation of national parks and how he worked closely with him because of his love for the wilderness. So those two things definitely went hand in hand. Earth Day was just the first step for these groups to call for broader environmental protections. So there's some pictures. At the top is the Cuyahoga River on fire, and then below are some New York Times pictures from the first Earth Day in 1970. Nixon had not come into office as an environmental activist, but the public's increasing concern with protecting the environment convinced him to pay attention to it and support environmental reforms. So under his leadership, we passed the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Act, in 1970. In addition to cleaning up and protecting the environment, the EPA sought to limit or to eliminate pollutants that cause a risk to the public's health. Some other environmental laws that Nixon signed during his presidency: the Clean Air Act in 1970 to deal with air pollution, and limited what factories were allowed to legally emit in terms of pollutants. The same thing with vehicles. So car companies had to kind of make some adjustments there. The Clean Water Act in 1973 limited the amount of pollution that industries and agriculture were allowed to not clean up. And then the Endangered Species Act in 1973 promoted the protection of endangered plants and animals. And then Gerald Ford continued on in Nixon's footsteps when he took over in 1974, created the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The EPA investigated the Love Canal in 1978. A resident of the Love Canal, which is near Niagara Falls, upstate New York, hung a sign from his home that said, give me liberty, I've already got death." This referred to the fact that residents of the community had exceptionally high rates of birth defects and cancer, and so reporters in the EPA investigated determined that these diseases were caused by thousands of tons of toxic chemicals being dumped into the ground, and that ground, it gets into the water, and it was causing birth defects for people that lived in that area. The Love Canal contamination prompted Congress to establish Superfund in 1980. One of Superfund's goals is to restore sites in ways that provide economic and environmental benefits to communities. Alright, it's a short section, like I said, so just a couple more things here. Shortly after the investigation of Love Canal, an accident occurred in the nuclear energy industry. On March 28, 1973, a nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, began to malfunction and to actually melt. The plant threatened to release radioactive gas, so the governor called a state of emergency and shut it down. To reassure the public that it was safe, President Jimmy Carter and his wife went on a tour of the reactor. While the incident was contained and there was no risk to public health, it still made an impact on how Americans viewed nuclear energy. A lot of them saw it as dangerous and not worth the risk, fearful that nuclear plants could expose us to dangerous things like that. As more environmental regulations were passed, opposition rose to it as well, because you've probably figured out by now, the more rules you put on a company, it's a little harder for them to make money. They're going to do one of two things. They're going to accept that they might make less, so they're going to find a way to cheat. So conservatives believe that it stripped individuals of their property rights, which they may have a point there and they may not. That's one of the good things about democracy in our country, is it makes you look at all the sides, and that is the job of elected officials, is to speak for their side and make sure we're looking at it for that way. Some believe private property owners would do a better job taking care of the environment because the owners had an interest in preserving the land. Many industry leaders were concerned that too much environmental regulation would actually hamper business and profitability, which I kind of mentioned that already. As the 70s came to a close, Americans remained divided on what role they believed the government should play in conserving and protecting the environment. To kind of go back to the second bullet point there, where it says some believe private property owners would do a better job protecting and taking care of the environment if they owned it. There are some what do you call it? Some kind of tax breaks and credits and different things, like if you own land and can show that you're preserving it and taking good care of it, and the wildlife, like if you live in an area that has a lot of wildlife or doing well there, there's something to be said for that. So all of these points, like I said a minute ago, need to be made, because it's good to have a well-rounded view of things, and that's one of the good things about the checks and balances system in our country. It works in ways when you're not really traditionally looking for it to. It works within its own branches, I should say. Just 2 questions for this section. It's not too difficult. Make sure you get those done in your notes, and that will be it for this chapter of notes. We'll move on to the presidencies of John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson next.